Oh, thank you very much. Very, very kind of you, North Finchley. Lovely to
My name's David Baddiel, and I'm a comedian.
This is a lovely joke, I think, this. Sometime after the war, a Holocaust survivor dies and goes to heaven. When he gets there, God asks this man to tell a Holocaust joke. So he does. And God says, that's not funny. And the survivor says, well, I guess you had to be there. It's a beautiful joke because, as I said when I put it on Twitter, he wasn't. You could denote his absence by the Holocaust, if anything. So I'd say that on Twitter, and blimey, the next thing you know, Marcus is saying, it didn't happen, but it should have.
Like anyone with a Jewish background, I feel the history of the Holocaust in my bones. In fact, I wouldn't be here if my grandparents hadn't escaped Nazi Germany just before the war.
As you can see, J obviously means Jew. That's my grandma.
But as for my relatives left behind,
This is my extended family. They didn't make it, they were murdered.
so I've never understood how the Holocaust can possibly be denied. But today, 1 in 6 people around the world believe it's been exaggerated or claim it never happened.
There's this hatred that Jews have for Europeans because we didn't save them from the gas chambers that never existed.
Which is why, 75 years after the Nazis slaughtered 6 million Jews, I'm going to delve into the dark world of Holocaust denial.
The Holocaust is nothing but anti-German hate propaganda posing as history.
From its beginnings during the war,
I'm interested in the way that the Nazis were destroying evidence.
They use napalm.
Napalm.
to today's virulent online denial,
Here's the key sentence. This is obviously a ploy, and I actually do want to gas kikes.
and its real-world consequences.
So it appears to be a lone gunman who entered into the museum and opened fire.
Can I give you a hug?
And as survivor testimony fades, I want to find out why denial happens and what can be done to stop the Holocaust becoming fake news.
Holocaust denial. It's anti-Semitic, it's a falsification of history, it's lies, it's idiocy, but it also hurts real people.
This is Washington. I'm here to visit the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where I've been struck by a quote inscribed on the side of the building.
The first thing you see as you approach the Holocaust Memorial Museum is this statement by Eisenhower. I wasn't aware of it before. After he went to a concentration camp in 1945, he talks about the cruelty and the bestiality that he saw there. But he also says, I made the visit in order to be in a position to give first-hand evidence of these things, if ever, in the future, there develops a tendency to charge these allegations to propaganda. His first thought on seeing these images, seeing this cruelty, this bestiality, was this will be used in the future to say this wasn't true.
Eisenhower was right that the scale and horror of the Holocaust was hard for humanity to accept. But it was also one of the most well-documented events in history. Its roots lie in 1930s Germany, when centuries-old myths that Jews are subhuman and yet somehow also in control of the world were used by the Nazis to fan the flames of anti-Semitic hatred. When war broke out in 1939, the Nazis enacted what they called the final solution to the Jewish problem. Concentration camps were built all over Europe. Millions were murdered in gas chambers. I'm in Helmano. Unlike Auschwitz, which was partly a labor camp, this place, like a number of others in Nazi-occupied Poland, was purely an extermination camp. When Jews were brought here, they were killed within 1 hour of arrival. The reason I've come is because extraordinarily, it's where Holocaust denial started.
200,000 people were killed here, 600,000 people at Belzec, 300,000 at Sobibor. And most people don't know those names because people didn't survive those places to tell the story, but also because what happened here was covered up.
Historian Bartek Janica has spent years researching this site.
What I'm interested in is the cover-up.
the way that the Nazis were destroying evidence.
First, in half of 1942, Special Commando Paul Blobel came here. He was responsible to destroy the evidence of mass killing Jews in Eastern Europe.
So there was actually someone...
And
I've never heard that name, Paul Blobel.
Paul Blobel.
He was responsible for destroying the evidence. That was his job.
He came here and showed how to destroy the bodies. So they used some kind of napalm,
Okay.
some kind of explosives, some
right.
kind of acids to destroy the bodies.
Yeah.
And later they decided to build the crematories. They were huge pits with walls from the bricks inside.
Some Holocaust deniers are always saying, well, it takes a long time to burn a human body and it's very difficult to burn a human body.
It was very, very, very fast process.
Because of the enormous heat that would be generated by a
because
crematorium this size.
After burning, they used bone mill to mill the bones to the pole.
Bone mill.
Yes.
This is incredible.
Yes.
It was not enough, they cremated them, then not enough that even though they were just ash, that they still wanted to get rid of the ash and the fragments of bone that were left.
Yes.
So they had to buy bone mills.
Yes. Even.
And then were they finally happy at that point that they'd covered it up?
They put the ashes to the bags and moved them elsewhere to the forest, to the rivers, farms. Yes.
It was used as...
Yes.
As... I can't think of the word now. It's so shocking, I can't think of the word. Fertilizer.
Yes, yes. Even such things.
Okay.
It's incredible.
It's absolutely incredible.
So here you can look at the original fragments of the crematories.
God, they're very thick, aren't they?
And they even used some fragments of Jewish properties. For example, you can see the wheel of the cart used to strengthen
From a
the
children's...
walls. Children's cart.
Wow. That's so extraordinary. I think that might be one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in my life. That bit of a child's cart in this wall. Okay, so this is unexpected. We've now bumped into someone who is 88 and who lived here at the time, so we're just going to find out what he can tell me about it. Hello. Hello. When did you live here?
Ja od urodzenia jestem tutaj. Ja mam 88 lat teraz. 14 lat jak skończyła się wojna, no.
What did you think was happening to the Jews?
No to wiedział, że się polą, bo przecież...
Is he aware that there are people now who deny that any of this ever happened?
Nie było tam. Ja nie wiem, bo wedle mnie to strach patrzeć na to, co było tu. No. To jak krzyczeli, to Boże, zlituj się to. To strach słuchać było.
There's no questioning the terrifying reality of the death camps. But the fact that Nazis wanted to conceal what they were doing is something that has always puzzled me.
Everything I've read suggests that within the Nazi high command, the extermination of European Jews was their greatest achievement. So why are they covering it up? There's a clue, I think. There's a speech by Himmler in which he talks about page of glory that is never to be written. That's what the final solution was. It's a very glorious thing, but we must never tell people about it. People must never know about it. Is it at some level that the Nazis knew that what they were doing was deeply shameful? Or was it just the strangest doublethink that they could do all this, consider it glorious, and yet still think, and now we have to pretend it never happened?
But the Nazis weren't the only ones manipulating the truth about the Holocaust. Early in the war, the British were receiving reports of Nazi atrocities in Europe. But there was concern at the Ministry of Information, the government propaganda machine, about how the public might react. I've come to the National Archives at Kew to track down a disturbing memo from 1941 that shows just what kind of information the Ministry of Information wanted to suppress.
This is the actual memo to British propagandists, people writing about the Nazis and how terrible they were in order to make the British public feel this is a war that we should be fighting.
It should not be too extreme. Sheer horror stuff, such as the concentration camp torture stories, repel the normal mind. In self-defense, people prefer to think that the victims were specially marked men, and probably a pretty bad lot anyway. A certain amount of horror is needed, but it must be used very sparingly and must deal always with treatment of indisputably innocent people, not with violent political opponents and not with Jews. Isn't that incredible? It's saying that the Jews, just by virtue of being Jews, are not in the category of the indisputably innocent. It should concentrate on the relentless and all-pervasive pressure of the Nazi machine on the ordinary, harmless individual. So again, that follows on, remember, not with Jews. And I would contend this is the beginnings, in a way, of Holocaust denial, certainly in this country. A deep-rooted sense that, yes, the Jews are being killed, but we can't really go to town on that because people will think, well, the Jews, they were probably in some way responsible for what's happening to them. This is speaking to deep-rooted anti-Semitism.
The Gaumont British News, presenting the true facts of a crime unparalleled in the history of the world.
When the camps were liberated in 1945, there was still a sense that ordinary people would not relate to the victims if they were identified as Jews. In an effort to universalise the Allied victory as a triumph of good over evil, many newsreels, like this one from Belsen, omitted the fact the majority of the victims were Jewish.
They can smile now, these people who a few short weeks ago thought they would never smile again.
After the war, the truth about the Holocaust continued to be obscured. Although leading Nazis were put on trial for war crimes, there was now a new enemy, the Soviet Union. West Germany had become an ally in the fight against communism. Its image needed to be rehabilitated, and the war trials were wound down. Europe began to rebuild itself. People wanted to put the horrors of the war behind them. An eerie silence fell over the memory of the Holocaust. Weirdly though, in the 1970s, when I was a teenager, I remember a whole swathe of stuff coming out questioning the reality of the Holocaust.
Well, this is how I remember it, this sort of thing. Like really cheaply made, an unbiased eyewitness report of the real life in a concentration camp. There were no gas chambers. I remember this. I remember the phrase, did 6 million really die?
The authors of these pamphlets called themselves revisionists, self-styled maverick historians arguing against the established narrative of the Holocaust.
It's very typical that they have nerdy, geeky science in them. They think that the way to achieve an idea that the Holocaust didn't happen is by being incredibly specific about the ventilation of a gas chamber at Auschwitz.
Behind all this is the idea evil Jews have tricked the entire world in order to gain a nation-state in Israel and reparations from Germany.
I like having all this stuff in here.
It's really weird because it's soiling. It's sort of deeply soiling, seeing this stuff. Why is there a slightly porny cartoon next to some fleeing Jews?
I want to know where all this noisy, false history came from. What broke the silence of the post-war years? So I've come to see Dr. Nick Terry, historian and expert in the evolution of Holocaust denial.
So the Cold War creates a situation in which the Holocaust itself becomes something that's slightly downplayed.
Yeah.
Then when does it change?
In 1960, suddenly Eichmann is arrested.
Tell us who Eichmann was.
Well, Adolf Eichmann organised and oversaw the deportations of Jews, mainly to Auschwitz, but also to other locations in Poland. He's put on trial in Jerusalem, which I think is not only the first televised trial, but it was certainly a trial that, got a huge amount of international publicity. The Eichmann trial really is a watershed in the global awareness of the Holocaust, and the anti-Semites of the world really react very badly indeed.
This connection between awareness of the Holocaust and denial became even more apparent in 1978, when this extremely popular mini-series was broadcast in America and then in Europe.
We take them to the showers, we burn them and bury the ashes. Absolutely ingenious.
When it was first shown in the US, Holocaust was watched by 120 million people.
There's a viewing hole, Professor, if you'd care to look.
Deniers were quick to exploit the surge in public interest.
Tell me about these guys.
Yeah.
Fred Leuchter and Ernst Zundel.
Well, Zundel was kind of one of the leading mail order salespeople for Holocaust denial pamphlets. He kind of very much ramps up his campaign after the broadcasting and TV series Holocaust. And then he's prosecuted under a law against spreading false news by distributing this Holocaust denial pamphlet, Did 6 Million Really Die?
Zundel found himself in court in 1985, and then again in 1988.
Ernst Zundel arrived at court surrounded by supporters wearing hard hats. They are bodyguards for a man who says the Holocaust is a myth and who's prepared to argue that before a judge and jury.
The Holocaust is nothing but anti-German hate propaganda posing as history.
Zundel saw the trial as a case to help promote Holocaust denial in the mainstream. He didn't need to spend $1 million in advertising. He was getting the advertising for free.
Good morning. My name is Fred Leuchter. I'm an engineer from Boston in the United States.
Zundel employed Fred Leuchter to try and prove there were no gas chambers at Auschwitz. Leuchter filmed himself secretly taking samples from the walls to be later tested for traces of cyanide, the gas the Nazis used to kill their victims.
Extraordinary, isn't it? Because it feels, for want of a better word, sacrilegious, that with no authority at all, this bloke steals into a crematorium and just chips away with his own crappy little tools at the brick of the gas chambers.
Zundel was convicted of spreading false news and sentenced to 9 months. Leuchter's report was deemed inadmissible in court and was later rubbished as pseudoscience. But this didn't put an end to Holocaust denial. And one thing Nick Terry said has worried me. If, as he suggests, Holocaust denial always flourishes when awareness of the Holocaust goes up, will this program inadvertently fan the flames of denial? Well, the BBC have just announced that this program is being made. And already, a host of excitable deniers have contacted me online.
Average Saxon said, "Imagine my shock." And Average Saxon's shock is about the fact that he has managed to take from my Wikipedia page a cutting which shows that both my parents are from Jewish families, and he's ringed that to show that he's busted me as a Jew. Dermot Mulqueen, have you read # the myth of German villainy yet? So Dermot on Facebook is President Mulqueen, and who I think is Irish, has a beautiful picture of some horses in a field. It's really lovely. And then if you scroll down to his first post, it's a picture of Hitler. Lovely picture of Hitler, watercolour. He tells you that World War II was essentially a war between two competing ideologies, nationalism versus Jewish internationalism. His affiliation, he says, is independent. His political views, moderate.
If I'm really going to understand Holocaust denial, I'm starting to think I might have to meet a denier. But it's not a prospect I'm particularly looking forward to.
One of the things about this subject is that if you're Jewish, you basically are conflicted about Holocaust deniers. At one level, you don't want to have anything to do with them, you don't want to speak to them, you want to ignore them and not give them a platform. At another level, another part of you thinks, what I'd like now is a Jewish superhero who can demolish them with one fact after another about the truth. Bam! Holocaust denier. Take that, Holocaust denier. And I'm actually on my way now to meet a woman who is the nearest thing we have to that Jewish superhero.
Deborah Lipstadt has been fighting Holocaust denial for more than 25 years. And it was in 1996 that she came up against her most notorious adversary.
On Newsnight tonight, the historian branded a racist and an apologist for Hitler, and the woman who beat him in the libel trial of the year.
In her book, Denying the Holocaust, Deborah Lipstadt accused British historian David Irving of being a denier.
Good evening. Once upon a time, David Irving was considered a talented, if controversial, historian. He thought he could walk upon water.
I live in Mayfair, I drive a Rolls-Royce, I have 4 children. I'm very happy. I've got everywhere I wanted to be. No one's yet shot me down. I'm indestructible, I think.
Despite being stocked in mainstream bookshops, Irving's most notorious work, Hitler's War, was widely seen as siding with Hitler's views. Ultimately, Irving was a rabble-rouser for Holocaust denial.
Ridicule alone isn't enough. You've got to be tasteless about it. You've got to say things like more women died on the back seat of Senator Edward Kennedy's car at Chappaquiddick than died in a gas chamber at Auschwitz.
But when he was accused of being a denier by Lipstadt, he denied being a denier and took her to court for libel. Broadly speaking, Irving's position was, how could he be a Holocaust denier when the Holocaust didn't happen? Which left Deborah Lipstadt in the surreal position of having to prove it did happen. To many, it felt like the Holocaust was on trial. The final judgment came in 2000 and bankrupted Irving. But Holocaust denial was once again in the limelight.
The consequence of this case, whether intended or not, is that David Irving is now the best-known Holocaust denier in the world. Would it been wiser, do you think, not to have written your book in the first place?
No, absolutely not. I wrote my book to expose the modus operandi of deniers, who these people are, what they do, how they operate as wolves in sheep's clothing.
I've come to meet Deborah and her lawyer from the trial, Anthony Julius, to discover more about their experience of taking on a denier.
Hello. Anthony.
David.
How good to see you. How are you doing?
Very good.
Hello, Deborah. Shall I sit here?
Yeah.
On a simple emotional level, what did you feel like when you won, when you heard the judge read the summation of his thoughts?
I felt vindicated, even though I knew I had done nothing wrong. And I felt a certain degree of relief. And I can get verklempt now, you know.
Get verklempt, that's good.
But I knew how much pain and distress this had caused to survivors. You'd walk down the long corridor leading to the courtroom, and they'd reach out to hand you lists with their names of their family. They'd reach out to touch you. Then you try to say to them, no, it's going to be okay. We're going to win this. The facts are on our side. But you saw how vulnerable they were, and how what can seem like, a falsified version of history, it's complete idiocy, is hurting real people.
One of the issues in this programme is to have some moments where I do engage with Holocaust deniers so that we can move on essentially to make it clear what a pernicious problem is, blah, blah, blah. I'm still worried about that. I'm still worried about how that is okay. I don't want to give legitimacy to these people or give them a platform.
We had no alternative because he sued, so we defended. We defended in a way that I think made him regret attacking us. You don't need to seek out these Holocaust deniers and give them airtime, so don't. I don't know what the arguments are in favour.
The arguments that are in favour are the world is different now than when your trial happened. Social media is creating a situation whereby all sorts of small distortions of the truth create a larger distortion. So therefore the need, unfortunately, to engage and deflect and say that lies are not true is more burning than ever.
Do you address the lies by giving more airtime to them, which is what you'll be doing, by going and interviewing the
Or do you address the
deniers?
lies by laying out what they've said and then demolishing it?
That thing that Anthony Julius said, it obviously touches on something that I'm already worried about with this film, but it's also kind of clarifying, because when he says, oh, you're just giving them airtime, I think 20 years ago, a policy of better to ignore them, that would have been correct. But now, the problem is that Holocaust deniers have airtime, just not on screens like this one. there are parts of the internet where anti-Semitism and racism becomes incredibly extreme. Sadiq Khan, last Christmas, lit a menorah in Trafalgar Square. And he's there with lots of Muslims and lots of Jews. I thought it was nice. So I tweeted, multiculturalism, despite all you have heard recently, is mainly fucking great. And then Evaluator says it seems to suit a certain band of rootless cosmopolitans. Now, this is another alt-right code for Jews. Stalin called Jews rootless cosmopolitans after World War II. And what Evaluator believes by saying this is a conspiracy theory called the Great Replacement, in which Jews are promoting multiculturalism to subvert the white races. It is, of course, complete nonsense, but it is really, really believed by a lot of terrible people.
As with anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial can come in many forms. I'm meeting Deborah again because I want to ask her about some of the more subtle and apparently acceptable types of denial she's recently written about.
A phrase I've heard you use is soft denial. Tell us what that is.
I tend to divide Holocaust denial into hardcore denial and softcore denial. Hardcore denial is there were no gas chambers, the Jews made this up. Softcore denial comes in many forms. And they say, yes, a bad thing happened to you, and we acknowledge it's a bad thing, and we mourn it every January 27th. We come and we stand in silent for a minute or so. But look at you now. Why are you going on about this? Enough already. The only reason you're going on about this is because you're privileged and you have the power to control society, to get the BBC to do a documentary on it, to get the government to pass, a Holocaust Memorial Day. So that's one form of softcore denial. And then you have softcore denial that reshapes the facts to serve another political end. We see it particularly in former Soviet bloc countries. Yes. We're not dealing so much with a denial of the facts, but a rewriting of the facts.
The rise in nationalism across Europe has fueled attempts by some governments, such as Hungary and Poland, to airbrush their history by downplaying their collaboration with the Nazis during the Holocaust. I've come to Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. 95% of the Jewish population were killed here during the war. And it's a matter of record. The Nazis couldn't have done it without Lithuanian collaboration. It might look peaceful now, but recently a controversy erupted here. The man commemorated on this plaque used to be considered a Lithuanian hero. His name is Jonas Noreika, a freedom fighter who was part of a partisan resistance movement against the Soviet occupation here. But recently, evidence has emerged exposing him as a Nazi collaborator who, during the war, signed documents that sent Jews to their death. Despite these revelations, some Lithuanian nationalists are furious Noreika's memory is being tarnished. Local historian Akvila Nojinanya, like most people in the city, has strong opinions on the issue.
This you still see
that's where
the nails.
Plaque was.
Been removed just a few weeks ago.
And that people have put these things up.
Yeah.
It's your opinion that Noriega was a collaborator.
He understood what was happening to Jews. He was inside of all of that. He must have had the idea what would happen to Jews in ghettos. I consider him as a collaborator, of course.
So from your point of view, it's correct that his plaque has been taken down.
But now, Akvila is taking me to meet someone who thinks Noreika's plaque should be reinstated.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm David.
Kastutis.
Kastutis Makavicius is a proud nationalist and grandson of a partisan freedom fighter who, like Noreika, fought the Soviet occupation.
So this is all pictures of your town
yes,
in history,
yep.
And this is all Hell's Angels.
This is free time.
Okay. Is that you?
Yes, it's me.
Yeah, amazing.
On these pictures is my grandpa.
What is happening here?
We have big fight with Soviet army. Mano senelis ir dar 15 žmonių liko apginti visų kitų partizanų, kurie atsitraukinėjo. Jie žinojo, kad jie mirs.
So this is your grandfather after he was killed, is that right?
Yes.
When they killed the partisans, they would place their bodies in the city squares.
So to identify sympathisers and family members.
Yeah, and also to frighten the people.
Frighten, yeah. That is horrific.
Given his family history, it's understandable Kęstutis has strong feelings about the accusations Jonas Noreika was a Nazi collaborator.
How do you feel about the whole business of the plaque and the taking it down?
Žmogus, kuris paaukojo savo gyvybę dėl tėvynės, kuris yra apdovanotas didžiausiu apdovanojimu, jį sutrypė.
Do you accept, Kęstutis, that Noriega was a collaborator?
Ar žmogus, kuris kovoja už Lietuvą, jį galima savadinti kolaborantu?
Like the basis why he is considered as a collaborator and what's been used by the mayor of Vilnius is this document.
Ir kaip jisai tikrai, jeigu būtų žinojęs, kad jisai pasirašo dokumentą, kuris vėliau pasekoje bus žydų žudymas, jisai tikrai būtų nepasirašęs.
Kęstutis' certainty worries me. I know that at least 200,000 Lithuanian Jews were killed during the war, so I do some more research. And the evidence Noreika was a collaborator is overwhelming, much of the proof unearthed and posted online by his own granddaughter.
Jonas Noreika signs orders that Jews leave their property, give up all their assets, asking for the transfer of Jews. That is Jonas Noreika's signature. And then there's a description in here of what happened. On October the 2nd, the German commandment ordered Jews to go to the market square, acting as if they would be led to work by lining them up and separating men from women, children and elderly. This Lithuanian residents and Lithuanian police battalion surrounded the square. As the Jews panicked, they tried to escape and were shot. Wagons arrived to the market square so the bodies could be loaded and brought to the waiting pit where they were buried. Documents showing that that property was then distributed by Jonas Noreika to hospitals and schools and no doubt to partisans. But I'm afraid that doesn't make it right.
The reluctance of some Lithuanian nationalists to see Noreika as a collaborator is a form of Holocaust denial. But it's also something rooted in the complexity of this country's past.
What's clear to me is that Lithuania is trying to reclaim its history, as a lot of Eastern European countries are, after a long time where their history was decided for them by the Soviets. And part of what that involves is slightly redrawing for some people what happened in the Holocaust. And it's kind of difficult to know exactly how I feel about that. But what I think is, one of the things about being British is that I personally feel quite proud of being British. It doesn't stop me knowing that the British have done lots of terrible things. Now that might be just because I come from a very old culture that hasn't had to rebuild its history, but it seems to me that in countries where building the history is kind of newer, it's almost like all or nothing. It's like, no, we can't admit that our heroes maybe were compromised by doing bad things in the Holocaust, because then we might have no heroes at all.
If national identity is a factor in Holocaust denial, then I want to find out where in the world it's most prevalent. This recent global survey categorizes deniers as those who believe the Holocaust has been exaggerated or is entirely a myth.
Lowest rate of Holocaust denial, 2% in Sweden, well done Sweden, 4% in Iceland, 4% in Czech Republic, 4% in Denmark. It's got a slight Eurovision quality, this bit. And then 6% in the UK. So these are all quite low. If you look at the other side of this page, highest rate of Holocaust denial, 82%. And what place do you think has 82% Holocaust denial? It's the West Bank and Gaza.
To find out more about Holocaust denial in the Middle East, I'm going to see Professor Gilbert Ashkar, who recently published a book called Arabs and the Holocaust.
Hi, Gilbert.
Hello.
Very nice to meet you. I'm David.
Nice meeting you. Yes, come in.
the straightforward statistics for people who might be considered to be Holocaust deniers is very high in the Middle East. But the reasons for that are not straightforward.
I don't think you can genuinely, without some degree of pathology, to be frank with you, be a Holocaust denier in Europe. But you can be perfectly sane mentally and be a Holocaust denier in the Middle East because of ignorance on the topic and therefore adherence to a view that says, well, the Israelis, the Zionists, have inflated the figures and all that in order to blackmail Western governments. Whereas, imagine yourself in Gaza, if you're a Palestinian, and being found and having had all these wars waged by the Israeli state, killing thousands of people, destroying and all that. When you live there, Holocaust denial is an attitude. It's not something that, it's not a belief of people, it's more a kind of provocative attitude. You are oppressing me every day. How can I hurt you? Well, by denying what
This
you
central
regard
part of your
as
identity.
sacred. Yeah.
What you're saying is, essentially, it's a political cry. It's a political and social cry.
Yeah.
It's to say, fuck you and your sacred thing. Okay?
Exactly. You put it in the right words. That's exactly how it functions. And that's very different from Holocaust denial in Western countries.
I think it's been fairly clear up to this point that Holocaust denial is a bad thing. I think we're all fairly clear about that. I think we're now moving into an area where we're trying to understand that there might be certain types of Holocaust denial which are excusable or understandable or not as bad as other types of Holocaust denial. And that's a very complicated thing that I'm not sure I'm prepared to accept.
It made you feel uneasy just talking about it.
Yeah, it does make me feel uneasy. It makes me feel uneasy just talking about it a bit. I mean, I think that the minute you start to say, well, actually, this type of Holocaust denial might have some legitimacy, I can hear, not that far down the line from that, the Holocaust didn't happen. I've done lots of jokes on Twitter about the Holocaust. For example, here is a picture of my brother Ivor and my cousin Michael holding some mournful commemoration candles last Holocaust Memorial Day. It's a very beautiful picture, which I only slightly ruined, I think, by saying, and it's mournful commemoration from me, and it's mournful commemoration from him. There's a bloke over here still doesn't get it. It's the two Ronnies, right? Now, people say you can't do jokes about the Holocaust, but it's okay. There's not a subject you can't joke about. It's the joke that counts.
As I delve deeper into Holocaust denial, the more it's unsettling me, especially in its latest and most dangerous form on the internet.
So here's Andrew Anglin, and he runs a website called The Daily Stormer. He creates a kind of comedy, not very funny, but comedy thing whereby all sorts of extreme alt-right ideas, including Holocaust denial, are perpetrated in a kind of jokey way.
Recently, the Daily Stormer's method of disseminating its particular brand of Holocaust denial was leaked online.
It's essentially a guide for people wishing to spread neo-Nazi ideas in the modern world. The tone of the site should be light. Most people are not comfortable with material that comes across as vitriolic, raging, non-ironic hatred. The unindoctrinated should not be able to tell if we are joking or not. Here's the key sentence. This is obviously a ploy, and I actually do want to gas kikes. In other words, if you want to spread the message, do it in a jokey way. Hide in plain sight or behind the veneer of laughter. It's a real problem for me as a comedian, because I've spent so much of my time actually defending comedy in the name of free speech. So you should really be allowed to joke about anything, and I still believe that, but I believe something complicated about it, which is that you do have to be able to justify every joke.
The danger with online Holocaust denial is, of course, sometimes it doesn't stay online.
So it appears to be a lone gunman who entered into the museum and opened fire.
In 2009, security guard Stephen Johns was murdered by a Holocaust denier at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. In more recent years, crimes motivated by anti-Semitism have escalated further. In 2017, a neo-Nazi drove his car into a crowd of protesters at Charlottesville, killing Heather Hayes. Then, a year later, 11 worshippers were gunned down at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Before each of these attacks, the killers had been spreading anti-Semitic hatred on social media platforms.
Is it symptomatic of a larger, bigger problem? That's my fear.
So in 2018, Mark Zuckerberg said that although he found Holocaust denial deeply offensive, he said, I don't believe that our platform should take that down because I think there are things that different people get wrong. I don't think they're intentionally getting it wrong. So my issue with that is Facebook continue to allow Holocaust denial on their platform. They don't allow direct hate speech. And my problem is that Holocaust denial is hate speech.
Since I started this program, I've been trying to get a meeting with Facebook, and they've finally given me the thumbs up. Their Director of Public Policy for Europe is ex-Lib Dem MP Richard Allen.
Nice to meet you. How are you? I'm good. How are you?
I want to find out how they decide whether or not something should be taken down from their platform.
So to be clear, we have a policy on hate speech. So direct attacks on Jewish people will come off the platform. But to make the wrong statement about the facts of the Holocaust, I do not think the Holocaust happened, or I think the Holocaust happened with this number of people dead rather than that number of dead, may be permitted on the platform.
But the issue I have, I guess, is that my position as a Jew, but also just as a thinking person, is that no one denies the Holocaust just because they're wrong. It's a direct way of saying Jews are liars, Jews have tricked the world for their own gain. It's Jews are the most pernicious, evil race that exists. It is hate speech. There's no other conclusion.
If somebody said, I believe the Holocaust didn't happen and Jews are liars, that would come down.
I don't think that and, well, I'm saying that and is implicit.
Exactly, and the key test, just to understand the principle, is this harm test. So on balance, where factually inaccurate statements are removed, they're removed because of a very direct association with real-world violence. I think you're expressing the view that you think the nexus between anti-Semitism, active anti-Semitism, and Holocaust denial is so close.
Well, someone died in Charlottesville where they were chanting the Jews will not replace us. They believe, those people, in a conspiracy theory, which you will see on Facebook, that the Jews are masterminding a great replacement of the white races. Someone died there. And do you stop that conspiracy theory?
We've significantly tightened up our policies around white nationalism. We've reviewed that policy precisely in the light of events like Charlottesville, those awful events.
Can I show you something?
You can show me.
OK, let me just get this out. Hold on. So this is something I got from Facebook, a site called Did the Holocaust Really Happen? Would that constitute hate speech?
My own personal view would be that the implication of that is hateful.
Right.
And that I would have serious questions about whether that should stay up.
OK, I mean, I don't understand what else it might be. I mean, even saying I have serious questions slightly baffles me. What you mean by serious questions. It is on Facebook.
So I will ask why that would still be on Facebook.
I mean, interesting enough, would you say this wasn't then? Because it's not quite as extreme. It's a Jew clearly forcing this falsehood on the world. And you think, what about that?
And again, that one feels like, and you've expressed it, one of these borderline cases where if you accept the logic of our policy, which is we're not automatically removing all Holocaust denial, we're looking for something more explicitly racist in there. For me, that's borderline. There are signs in there.
The fact that inevitably leads to this and worse. I mean, it does.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference.
The reason one might decide that the content can be left up if it isn't a direct attack is that then you get the debate or challenge to that wrong speech.
The word debate bothers me a bit. To suggest that there's a debate about Holocaust denial is, again, very problematic.
I don't think the debate is about the Holocaust denial. The debate is about the fact that somebody said something that's wrong and stupid. Just be really clear. There is no equivalence. The person who denied the Holocaust is wrong, and in some cases malevolent, and there can be a lot of reasons why
I guess that's
one does that.
That's what we're talking about, isn't it? And in some cases is what I would disagree with. I would say in all cases. I just, in my experience doing this programme and in my life, have never come across anyone who denies the Holocaust in a benign way. It's not possible.
You can get as much wrong as you like. You can say
that the French Revolution happened in 2002 and have a whole website about how that really happened, because I don't think French people are going to be demonized by me setting up a website that says that. However, I know that it is simply the case that Holocaust denial is just a way of saying the Jews are liars, Jews are evil.
I'm coming around to the uncomfortable, unhappy conclusion that I'm going to have to meet at least one, a maximum of one, hopefully, Holocaust denier in order to try and understand this phenomenon. And the one I'm thinking about is this guy who got in touch with me when the programme was first announced, this guy Dermot Mulqueen. I think he's got a bit of everything. He's got a little bit, he's a bit of an all-rounder in that he's a bit of old school, revisionist, faux historian. He's also a troll. He's got loads of memes. He's got lots of very offensive stuff on his website. And so I think, yeah, he's like the perfect storm of where Holocaust denial is now. I think if you're going to talk about the devil, at some point you've got to meet the devil. This is Ennis in Ireland. And incidentally, I'm sitting in the very square where in 2015 Dermot Mulqueen put an axe through a TV in protest at Holocaust Memorial Day.
Here's the thing, I'm doing a documentary here about quite an extreme subject, but I'm not Louis Theroux. I love Louis Theroux, I should make it absolutely clear, he's brilliant. But what he's very good at is with people who've got extreme and unpleasant views of smiling and drawing them out and whatever. And to some extent, I just want to punch this bloke in the face. That's not going to draw him out, is it? You Dermot?
David, yeah, hi. How you getting on? Nice to meet you.
Dermot has recommended a place for us to talk. And no sooner have we sat down than he begins to trot out the same untruths we've heard many times before.
The whole narrative is about the final solution and the Holocaust and Auschwitz and the way this Zyklon B, they were killed with Zyklon B. And when you examine it, like I have done, there were no homicidal gas chambers. And then there was 15 ovens. You can only fit one, maybe two maximum, okay, at a time. And it takes an hour to burn a body, okay? So it's just not possible.
Everything you're saying now is based on this reading that you've done.
Exactly.
Yeah, and none of it is true, Dermot. That's the thing. None of it is real. Are you able to understand that you've bought into a lie?
I would have said the very same about you.
No, let me explain. I'm not here to hear you spout what all Holocaust deniers do, which is a series of weird facts and figures.
Because of the fact that I'm disputing the Holocaust, you hate anybody. There's this hatred of Europeans. You do.
I hate Europeans.
There's this hatred that Jews have for Europeans because we didn't save them from the gas chambers that never existed.
Okay, let me just point out one tiny flaw in that. If the gas chambers never existed, us Jews would have no reasons to hate Europeans. Why would we hate Europeans for something that actually never happened?
Because it's profitable. Exploitation of racism.
Unfortunately, at this point, I got sucked in to debating the facts of the Holocaust.
Auschwitz had a swimming pool. Okay, it had bakeries. Just leading up, just a moment now. Right?
Exactly what I think you shouldn't do.
Well, you control the BBC now. Do you accept that the Jews control the BBC?
In what way? I mean, if I controlled the BBC, I'd really be on it more.
And this went on for half an hour.
All I'm just saying is I would have lived a much happier life if I'd known that the Holocaust was a hoax.
Okay, this is what we have to come
to. I'd have lived a much happier life.
It's about peace
of mind. It's about peace of mind.
That's what I want. This is where we have to come to at the end of it. And this is why... I mean, you may
it's about having balance. It's about having balance in your mind and saying, okay, this is Hollywood.
Okay.
These 200.
Okay, here's the thing. I have said for a long time that conspiracy theory is how idiots get to feel like intellectuals. And that might be unfair, because I also think it's possibly how people get to order the world and feel that there's some way of comforting themselves in the world. Because what do you mean peace of mind? What does that mean? What was troubling you beforehand? Was it like a Matrix thing where you always felt...
It was a Matrix. I always felt I'd open a newspaper and I'd see an article about the Holocaust and this victim of the Holocaust and this I
don't know what newspaper you were reading.
I'm just saying we're constantly fed this narrative about anti-Semitism in Europe and whatever, and most of the anti-Semitism that Jews have encountered has either been usury or it has been satanic child sacrifice.
Okay.
okay, of Christians by Jews, okay?
Right. When's that happening?
Well, it's happened over the centuries.
You think Jews are still sacrificing babies?
I don't know. To be honest,
You think they might?
I'm not in the inside track. You know, that's something that you'd know.
Again, I haven't been invited.
Yeah.
To that particular party.
Okay.
Why did you believe it?
Sacrifice. Because it was a very good documentary.
Okay, about killing Christian babies. I think it's time for a song.
When Dermot first agreed to meet me, he was very keen to perform one of his Holocaust-denying songs.
Outside the synagogue there are 50 mercs. Yeah, Auschwitz had its perks.
Believe it or not, this is the less offensive of the two songs he performed.
Blind about yesterday, we're taught their version of history so they control their present and future events. Yeah, Auschwitz had its perks.
The song that you just sung to me, it's about 50 Mercedes outside a synagogue. Did you see 50 Mercedes outside a synagogue?
No. The point I was trying to make is, isn't it really bizarre that if you were a Jew, right, and the Germans wanted to murder all these Jews and they had a final solution and they exterminated 6 million Jews, don't you think it would be bizarre that you'd buy a German car, that you'd get out every day and you'd sit into a Mercedes to remind you of the 6 million that died?
No.
Don't you think, you don't think that's bizarre?
No, I've got an Audi.
You've got an Audi?
Yeah.
And
that proves, does it, that the Holocaust didn't happen, that I've got an Audi?
Well, it does raise questions.
I don't normally drink, but I felt I needed that. The whole thing was fucking weird, especially when he did the songs. Like, that's one of the weirdest moments of my life, sitting there and listening to those songs. Just the room, the fact that Dermot seemed to get into a kind of reverie, a kind of, here I am in my personal anti-Semitic Woodstock reverie. That was amazing. Obviously, he's using this stuff to try and make his world make sense. But this is not just some guy who plays the guitar and sings his silly songs. It is that, but it's also indicative of something much larger and more dangerous. I think it's very important to understand, however mad Dermot seems, we're not shooting fish in a barrel here. People believe this shit.
"2020 marks 75 years since the Holocaust ended. And as I said at the start of this programme, God wasn't there. But neither was Dermot Mulqueen or any of his thousands of followers on Facebook. In fact, no one that I've spoken to so far.
So I'm going to go and see Rachel Levy, who is a survivor. She's 89, and she's one of not very many Holocaust survivors left living in this country. Hello, are you Shelley?
I am. Hi, David.
Nice to meet you.
Shelley is Rachel's daughter.
Hello, how do you do?
Very nice to meet you.
And you, thank you. I haven't got any photos from my family except this little one. These are my two little sisters, and my brother is there. My auntie is standing over here. My mother is way back there holding the baby.
Rachel was 14 years old when in 1944 she and her whole family were taken away from their remote Czech village by the Nazis.
When we got to where we were going, the doors were opened and we were all piled out and there was the Gestapo waiting for us.
That was Auschwitz?
Yeah. I was very ignorant of it all. I really didn't know where I was.
No, well, there's no reason for you to know.
And my mother was shoved to one side, to the right, with my two little sisters, the baby in her arms. And my brother and I were pushed to the left. And they marched us out. I never saw her again.
So that was the last you saw?
That's the last
of your
I
mother?
Saw. And my two little sisters and my little brother. He wasn't 3 yet. I know that because he hadn't had his hair cut yet. It was only when I got into camp that I was told, see that chimney? That smoke coming out, that's where your mother went with the children, and so we never knew anymore.
In 1945, with the German defeat imminent, in one last attempt to cover up their atrocities, the Nazis marched the Auschwitz inmates west, away from the advancing Russian army. Rachel found herself at Belsen.
I found my auntie there. We were in this hut and everybody was getting very ill. Starvation, eaten up by lice. We had lice that we could pick off in handfuls from our bodies. My auntie was getting ill. I wasn't much better, but I could still crawl about. And she kept asking for water, which I used to crawl out to get some water, sometimes just from a puddle in the camp. By this time, there were bodies all over the camp as well. And then, but she got very angry with me because I couldn't go and get her water. One night, she said to these two friends, "This is my niece, will you look after her?" And they said, yes, they would look after me. And she was dead the next morning. She had died. And they took her body away and they threw it on the ground, on the heap. And I had to live with that. Doesn't matter how many times I tell that story.
It's the image, isn't it, Mum, of that moment?
I think that's enough. Can I give you a hug?
Yes, please. Thank you.
It's so deeply true, what she's saying. There's a sort of very, very basic, default, human, awful truth going on in these stories. And that's in the detail. The detail which moves you is the same detail that lets you know that it's true. And that therefore to say it's not true is obscene.
At the start of this process, I was worried about giving Holocaust deniers a platform. But having heard Rachel's testimony, I now think that showing the deniers' lies for what they are in all their absurdity makes the truth stronger, and preserving that truth is now more important than ever. This is Victoria Tower Gardens in London, the proposed site of a new Holocaust memorial.
I guess the question could be asked, why do we have to memorialise the Holocaust? And obviously it's out of respect for the victims, but I think there may also be another reason, which this film has brought home to me, which is that the Holocaust is unbelievable. It's unbelievable that humans did this to other humans. And what seems to be the case is that when something is unbelievable but true, the truth of it will always be attacked. And so that's why we need to build memorials to it. Memorials that say, this happened. It really happened.